I remember the night as if it were breathing with me. The forest was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves under a soft, pale light that flickered through the mist. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little too long, curling around the trees like fingers reaching for something unseen. I had walked here alone, drawn by a curiosity I couldn't name, following a faint hum that pulsed through the fog. My footsteps softened against the damp earth, and I felt the air thicken, each breath tasting of iron and something not quite natural. Above me, the sky was empty, or maybe it was watching. A single streak of light moved differently from the stars, hovering, almost alive. I should have turned back. But instead, I stepped closer, drawn to that strange glow, until the forest around me became a blur of mist and shadow. And then I heard it, a whisper, low and humming, just beyond the edge of sight. My heart slowed, my senses sharpened, and I felt an awareness that wasn't mine. Something was observing me. Not just from the forest floor, but from the dark expanse above, something vast and patient. And as I blinked, as if reality itself had shivered, I saw it. The air was cold, damp with the scent of wet leaves. The path ahead was narrow, tangled with roots that tugged at my shoes. Evening had settled, soft and gray. Shadows pressed against the trees, stretching longer than they should. I walked slowly, careful, listening to my own breath. Then, through the branches, a faint flicker, like a candle shivering in the wind. I thought it might be a campfire. I stepped closer, each footstep muffled by the thick carpet of moss and fallen leaves. The light pulsed, not steadily, but in uneven beats, like it was breathing. I blinked, and the shapes shifted. Dark, shifting forms. They seemed to dissolve when I tried to focus. The forest grew quiet. Not the usual quiet. Heavy. Almost as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. I felt eyes on me. Everywhere. Peering through the branches. Watching, waiting. The light flickered again. Closer now between the trunks. I could see the pale glow reflecting off the damp bark. Shadows stretched, twisted, almost human in shape. A rustle. Soft footsteps behind me. Or was it the wind? I froze. The flicker pulsed once, twice, and then stopped. The shapes vanished. The forest returned to its muted green-gray. Silence pressed in. Thick, almost touchable. I could feel it settling over my shoulders. The smell of wet earth, sharp and raw, filled my nose. I moved. Slowly. Leaves crunched underfoot. Each sound echoed, sharp against the heavy quiet. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A trick of the eyes. A memory of firelight from another time, but the feeling didn't leave. The feeling of being small, alone, watched. Another flicker, faint, far ahead. I turned my head and a shadow slipped between the trees. Faster than I could follow. Just a flicker of movement. I stopped again. Held my breath. The air hummed softly. A static electric tension that made the hairs on my arms rise. I thought about running, then didn't. Couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the path. The light pulsed once more. Closer. Stranger. It didn't feel like a fire anymore. It felt alive. The forest seemed to lean in, branches brushing my shoulders, whispering over my skin. I smelled something faint, metallic, like blood. Or maybe rust. I blinked, and everything shifted again. The shapes that had been shadows now crouched just at the edge of the light. Watching, waiting, I whispered to myself. But my own voice sounded strange, hollow, like it didn't belong to me. The flicker slowed, and then stopped completely. I was left in darkness, only the memory of the light, trembling in the trees. I kept walking. But the feeling never left. Every step felt heavier, every breath echoed. I could feel it behind me. The unseen eyes, the quiet breathing of the forest itself. The path narrowed, twisting into shadows. And I knew, even if I never saw them again, I would never be alone. Not really. The fog hung low, thick as wool. It pressed against my skin, damp and cold. The ground beneath was soft, uneven, soaked with last night's rain. I could barely see a foot ahead. Shapes drifted at the edge of my vision. Shifting forms, pale and fleeting, always just beyond reach. Then the hum began. Low, almost inaudible at first. But it grew, vibrating in my chest, deep and unrelenting. I tilted my head, tried to find where it came from. But the fog swallowed the world. No trees, no path, no light. Only the hum and me. I kept walking. Every step muffled by the mist. Leaves clung to my shoes. Water dripped from unseen branches. The hum pulsed, a slow heartbeat inside my ribs. I pressed my palms to my chest. It answered me like it knew. Shapes flickered again, a shadow gliding just beyond my vision. I blinked. It was gone, a soft brush against my shoulder. I spun, but there was nothing. Only fog curling like smoke around my arms. The cold clung, damp and clinging. The hum deepened, vibrating through my teeth, my bones, my skull. I felt the air hum along with it. Every breath seemed to join the vibration. I slowed. The fog thickened. I could smell wet earth and something metallic, sharp. Something wrong. The shadows stretched and twisted in the gray. Figures draped in mist, moving against the edges of my sight. I couldn't focus on them. They were always there and not there. The hum shifted. Soft, almost melodic, but alien. It vibrated against the hairs on my arms. Against the soles of my feet, I reached out, touched nothing but wet air. The fog pressed into my fingers. Shivers ran up my spine. I thought about calling out, then didn't. My voice felt fragile, swallowed by the mist. Even the hum seemed to push it away, a cold brush on my shoulder again. Fingers? Fur? I didn't know. I shivered. The air tasted damp, metallic. I walked slower. Every movement measured, every step echoing against silence. The hum grew, surrounding me, folding the fog into vibration. Shapes floated closer, just for a heartbeat. Too fast to see, too near to ignore. I stopped, closed my eyes. The hum throbbed. My chest rose and fell in time with it. The fog whispered around me, rustled against my legs. The ground squished beneath my shoes. A faint smell of wet stone lingered. I opened my eyes. The shapes were gone. The fog lay flat again, pale and endless. The hum receded, leaving only a faint echo. I breathed slowly, tried to convince myself it was over, but the memory lingered in my bones. The mist shivered. A shadow flickered at the edge of vision, a brush against my shoulder, soft and deliberate. Then silence. I kept moving. The hum now only a memory, low and distant. The fog curling around me like a living thing. I was alone. Almost. The forest was quiet, but not empty. Tall trees loomed overhead, their trunks dark and slick with moisture. Shadows pooled at their bases, stretching far longer than they should. The ground was damp, soft underfoot, and smelled of moss and decay. Fog curled between the trunks, thick and pale. Every step I took, the shadows shifted. I noticed first the shapes. They didn't match the trees. Long, twisted, reaching shapes, dancing slightly, almost sentient, following me. The air was cold against my skin. I heard the faint clicking, slow at first. Then, in rhythm with my heartbeat. Click, click, click. Each pulse tightened in my chest. I stopped, held my breath. The fog clung to me, damp and pressing, but the shadows kept moving. Closer now, I could feel it. The weight of eyes, unseen but intent. A presence following, gliding between the fog and the trunks. The forest smelled of wet leaves, but now with a sharpness, metallic like iron or dried blood. I swallowed, my tongue tasting the cold air. A branch scraped against my arm, or something lighter, softer. I couldn't tell. I shivered. I took a careful step. The shadows twisted again, longer, darker, reaching just a fraction closer than before. The clicking matched my step now, synchronizing with my breath. I could feel the silence pressing around me, a static hum in the fog, low and constant, like the earth itself was holding its breath. I reached out to the nearest tree. Its bark was slick and cold under my fingers. The shadow at its base stretched toward me, thin and curling. I jerked my hand back, the clicking slowed, then stopped. The forest seemed to sigh. And I was alone. But not really. A soft rustling behind me, a shift of air. Something moving just out of sight. I walked. Careful, slow, my feet sinking slightly into wet moss. Every step echoed in the fog, every echo mirrored by the shadows. I tried to focus on the path. The trees, the trunks, the moss, but the shadows grew taller, stretching across my vision, creeping closer with each breath I took. The clicking returned, faint, now scattered, unpredictable, but always behind me, always waiting. I stopped again, felt the fog wrap around my legs, cool and wet. A faint metallic tang lingered in the air. The shadows swirled just at the corner of my eyes. I shivered, arms tight against my chest. I wanted to run, but something in the stillness rooted me. The forest itself seemed to pull me in. The fog lifted slightly. The shadows paused. I could see the pale light through the branches. The clicking faded. I kept walking. The forest quiet for now, but the shapes lingered at the edge of my sight, twisting, waiting, and I knew. Even when the fog lifted completely, even when I left this place, the shadows would follow, always. The ridge appeared through the fog, pale and jagged. Grass damp with dew clung to my shoes. The sky was gray, heavy with low clouds. I saw it then, a figure, pale as mist, standing atop the hill. It glowed faintly, almost like moonlight trapped in flesh. I froze. The air felt colder here. Each breath tasted of damp earth and distant rain. It didn't move, yet I knew it was watching. A weight pressed against my chest, heavy and silent. I took a step. Then another. The ridge stretched farther than it should, twisting beyond reason. Soft wind brushed my cheek, carrying the scent of wet stone and dry leaves. I blinked. The figure stayed, unmoving, unblinking, and yet aware. My footsteps pressed into the soft grass, rustling and damp beneath me. Every sound echoed strangely, swallowed by the fog. I moved closer, heart thudding, breath shallow. And the ridge stretched, impossibly, each step longer than the last. The figure didn't shift, yet the sensation of being observed grew. A hum rose in the air, low and vibrating through my bones. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I reached the top, and it was gone. No pale glow, no shape, only the ridge, stretching endlessly, curling into fog. But its gaze lingered. I felt it in the back of my neck, in the hollow of my chest, in the small hairs on my arms. The fog moved, shifting around rocks and grass, curling like smoke. The ridge no longer seemed fixed. It twisted, breathing, alive. I took a step back. The cold pressed into my knees. The wind whispered over my skin, damp and relentless. I blinked again. A shadow flitted along the edge of the fog, too quick to define, too deliberate to ignore. I stayed still, listening. The hum in the air faded, but the silence felt alive. I felt alone, and not alone. A presence lingered, watching, trapped somewhere between the ridge and the fog. I turned. The path back was unclear. Mist curling around the rocks, swallowing my footprints. I breathed slowly, tried to steady my chest. The figure was gone, yet its gaze remained. A weight I could not shake. The ridge stretched behind me, endless in its pale quiet. And I walked on, alone, almost. The night pressed down, heavy and thick. Air damp with mist, carrying the smell of cold earth and pine. The ground beneath my feet was soft, uneven, scented with wet leaves. The sky above was unusually dark. Stars shimmered faintly, scattered like fragile glass. Their patterns felt deliberate. A whisper drifted on the wind, slow, curling around my ears. It sounded like my own thoughts, but older, distant. Stretched beyond memory, I stopped walking. The mist wrapped around my ankles, clinging, cool. The whispers grew, subtle but insistent, like voices rehearsing something they had forgotten. The stars flickered, patterns shifting in ways that felt almost like language. I traced them with my eyes, but each blink scattered them, and the message dissolved into silence. The wind swirled again. Whispers brushed across my skin, tracing the backs of my neck, rustling my hair with soft insistence. I inhaled. The night tasted metallic, faintly of iron. I exhaled. The whispers followed, soft and patient. I tried to step forward, feet pressing into soft moss. But each step seemed heavier, dragging against the fog, dragging against the stars themselves. The whispers slowed. They mimicked my breath, my heartbeat. And in their rhythm I felt something watching, silent, attentive. The stars above pulsed faintly. A shimmer here, a flicker there. The patterns repeated, mirrored, almost as if the sky were breathing, almost as if it were speaking to me alone. I leaned back. eyes straining against the darkness, tracing the strange, quivering constellations. A rustle at my side. A soft footstep, or maybe the wind. I couldn't tell. Everything felt alive, every shadow a witness. The whispers curled into the fog. Around my ankles, up my sleeves, settling in the hollow of my chest. I closed my eyes, tried to still my breath. The night thickened, stars flickering in strange, secretive rhythms. When I opened them, the whispering had slowed, fading into something like memory. The sky shimmered faintly, quietly, a message I could feel but not understand. I walked on, slowly, feet soft against the damp earth. The night continued, unchanging, unhurried, and I moved beneath it, alone, almost. The forest canopy pressed overhead. Branches tangled dark against the dim sky. The air smelled of wet wood, moss, and a faint metallic tang. I stopped walking. The silence thickened, almost touchable. Something shifted above me, eyes, glowing, pale, blinking slowly from the treetops. I felt their patience, their intelligence. Watching. The fog hung low, curling around my legs, damp and cold. My own breath felt loud, clumsy against the hush. Every rustle of leaves echoed strangely, like whispers I couldn't understand. I tilted my head. Branches moved, but not naturally. They curved, twisted, bending toward me as if aware. The eyes blinked again, closer this time, glowing against the dark green of the leaves. I could feel them following each movement, silent, patient, calculating. My skin prickled. Goosebumps rose under the dampness. The forest had become a labyrinth. Every step echoed, yet led nowhere. Soft moss pressed beneath my shoes. The hum of life in the forest seemed to fade. Even the wind stopped. Only the eyes remained. Hovering above me, unwavering, I tried to look away. But my eyes found them again. Every blink returned me to their gaze. I felt small, exposed. The branches swayed slightly, brushing my face. The air tasted damp and iron-tinged. Something alive, something patient, molded the fog around me. I moved slowly, feet pressing into soft moss, hands brushing wet leaves. The eyes followed, always. I stopped again, listened to my own heartbeat. It thumped against the quiet. Each pulse mirrored by the unblinking stare above. A shadow passed overhead. Leaves whispered as it moved. The eyes blinked in rhythm, measuring, weighing, lingering. I felt the forest close in. Branches forming walls, paths folding over themselves, sound swallowed by their presence. The fog wrapped around my ankles. Cold, damp, relentless. I breathed carefully. The air hummed faintly with the memory of movement. I lifted my gaze. The eyes remained. Still patient, watching everything I did, I whispered to myself. Words barely formed. The forest listened. The eyes blinked again. I took a careful step forward. Then another. The canopy shifted slightly, branches brushing against the mist. And then slowly, I walked on. The eyes above never leaving. The forest a silent labyrinth of observation. I was alone. Almost. The trees thinned, giving way to a small clearing. Damp earth pressed underfoot, smelling faintly of moss and rot. And there it was, a cabin. Maps said nothing should be here, yet it stood silent, waiting. Its wood was gray, soaked with rain, smelling of mildew and decay. I stepped closer. The door moved slightly, creaking as if inviting me in. The wind carried a faint metallic scent, sharp and cold. I hesitated. Soft mist curled around my ankles, sticky and cold. Inside, darkness waited. Not just absence of light, something more. Patient. The door gave way easily, wood groaning beneath my touch. Inside, shadows stretched along the walls, crawling independently of any light. I could hear my own breath, uneven, the smell of wet wood and something older, earthy, heavy. A subtle hum pressed against my chest. Something shifted in the corner. I could feel it before I saw it. Watching, waiting, patient. The shadows moved again, creeping across the walls, writhing, pulling at the corners of the room, stretching toward me and recoiling in silence. I stepped further inside. The floorboards cold beneath my shoes. Each creak echoed strangely, swallowed by the dark. The air seemed thicker here, every breath tasting of wet earth and rust. I tried to steady myself. The shadows followed, growing longer, curling along the ceiling. They were alive, but not alive. A soft brush of movement near my shoulder. I turned slowly. Nothing, but I knew I wasn't alone. The corner felt heavy, weighted by presence. I could sense its patience, the slow, deliberate observation. The hum in the air pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat just beneath my skin. I pressed my hands to my chest. It mirrored my own. The room was quiet, but the quiet was alive. Shadows rippled along the walls, moving against logic. I moved toward the door, each step slow, deliberate. The floorboard creaked under my weight. The shadows reached toward me and withdrew, curling back into corners, waiting. I paused, breathed slowly. The presence in the corner didn't shift, didn't blink, only waited. I left the cabin. The door closed behind me with a soft groan. The mist hugged my ankles again. The forest outside smelled of damp pine, of earth, of rain. The cabin stayed, silent, watching, and I walked on, feeling the weight of regret settle into my chest. Alone, almost. The forest was dense, shadows stretching long and gray. Damp earth pressed against my shoes, heavy with moss and decay. The air smelled metallic, faintly of rain and old leaves. Then it started. Static, faint, irregular, like a broken radio left on the edge of hearing. It hummed in the air, curling around my ears. I tilted my head. It pulsed through my skull, low and insistent, vibrating inside my teeth and bones. I pressed my palms to my temples, but it didn't stop. The fog thickened, shaping itself into vague forms at the edges of my vision. They shimmered and twisted like reflections on water. Every time I blinked, they shifted, always just beyond my focus. I took a step, then another. The static grew louder, a soft vibration running through my chest. Each heartbeat seemed mirrored by the pulse in my ears. The shapes moved closer, slender, curling, impossible to hold in my vision. I could feel them pressing against the corners of my sight, fingers of shadow reaching into the fog. I froze. The air was heavy, damp, tasting faintly of iron. The static hummed through my skull again, low, persistent, insistent. I wanted to look away, but couldn't. A leaf brushed against my hand. Cold, wet, almost deliberate. I shivered. The shape shifted in response, mirroring my every movement in the fog. The forest felt alive. Every shadow pulsed with silent attention. The hum inside my skull seemed to grow, filling my chest, my teeth, my lungs. I tried to step forward. My feet sank slightly into moss and dirt. Each movement echoed in the fog, but the echoes were swallowed by the vibration of static. I blinked. The shapes swirled faster now, flickering, flowing, always just beyond the edge of my gaze. They weren't shadows, not entirely, not yet light. The hum grew louder, a low vibrating presence, pressing through the bones in my skull. I pressed my palms against my ears. It did nothing. I could smell the wet forest around me. Damp leaves, cold earth, a faint metallic tang. And I could feel the shapes in the air, curling toward me, patient, insistent. I stopped moving, breathed slowly. The fog swirled. The shapes shivered. The static hummed faintly in response. Then, as suddenly as it began, it quieted. The fog seemed to sigh. The shapes slowed, pulling back just beyond the corner of my vision. I exhaled. The static lingered, faint, a low reminder that I was still being watched. I walked on, feet soft against damp moss. The forest stretched endlessly, silent, except for the faint echo of static lingering in the air. I was alone, almost. The trees thinned, giving way to a clearing. Mist curled low over the ground, damp and cold. The air smelled of wet pine, earth, and something metallic, sharp. Then I saw it. A craft hovering silently above the ground. Smooth, impossible, edges hidden in the curling fog. I froze. My legs refused to move even as my mind screamed to run. The air around it shimmered faintly, like heat over asphalt, only colder, quieter, almost alive. I could feel it observing me, patient, deliberate, studying. I pressed my hands to my chest. My heartbeat thumped loudly in my ears. The fog twisted around the craft, wrapping the shape in soft, rolling clouds. I could barely see its surface, pale light reflecting faintly off its smooth curves. A hum rose in the air, low and vibrating. Not a sound exactly, more a pressure against my bones, a resonance in my teeth and skull. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed, and yet my eyes stayed fixed. The mist shifted again, tendrils brushing against my ankles, cold, damp, insistent. I could feel them curling around me, pulling me closer to the craft without touching. I blinked. The craft didn't move, but its presence pressed in, heavy and deliberate. I stepped slightly forward. The fog swirled. The hum grew louder, thrumming through my chest and legs, matching my heartbeat. The clearing smelled of rain and metal, a faint tang, electric. The forest around me was silent. No birds, no wind, only the hovering presence. I wanted to turn, but my body remained fixed. I felt seen, analyzed, measured in ways I could not understand. A shadow stretched across the mist, soft, curving, reaching outward. The craft remained still, edges hidden, smooth, impossible. I took another breath, cold and sharp in my lungs. The hum continued, pressing into my skull, vibrating through my chest. I felt my hands tremble, feet anchored to the soft, wet ground. The mist curled higher, wrapping around my legs, slow and deliberate. The craft remained, silent, watching. The fog and hum held me in place, alone, almost. The ground was soft, wet with recent rain. A thin fog curled around my ankles, cool and damp. The air smelled of wet stone and earth, sharp and metallic. I noticed the puddle first, shallow still, reflecting pale light from the sky. I knelt beside it, curious, careful, but the reflection, it wasn't mine. Not quite. Eyes too large, too patient. Skin pale, almost translucent. Waiting. I reached toward the water. Fingers hovering, trembling. The fog wrapped around my wrists, cold and damp. When my hand touched the surface, ripples spread, unnaturally. The reflection blinked first. Slow, deliberate, unnervingly aware. I froze. Breath caught in my chest, damp and shallow. The air shifted. A soft hum pressed against my bones. Leaves rustled above, but no wind moved them. The puddle's surface shimmered, bending light in ways that didn't make sense. I pressed closer. The reflection's gaze held me, studying me as I studied it. My fingers trembled above the water. The surface rippled again, as though alive, as though aware. I could smell the earth, cold, damp, and sharp with the metallic tang of rainwater. The fog clung to my hair, my sleeves, twisting with the ripples in the puddle. The reflection didn't mimic me. It moved on its own, blinking, tilting, watching. I couldn't look away. Couldn't break the gaze. The ground beneath me squished softly. The puddles shimmered in pale light, each ripple echoing the hum that pressed in my chest. I felt small, exposed. I leaned closer. Cold air brushed my cheeks. The reflection's eyes, too knowing, too patient. They measured me in silence. A soft rustle behind me made me flinch. I turned. Nothing. Only fog, curling over wet stone, wrapping the earth in quiet. When I looked back at the puddle, it rippled again. Slowly, deliberately, as if breathing, I reached a finger toward it once more. The water curved unnaturally beneath my touch. The reflection tilted its head, and blinked. I pulled back, heart thudding. The fog pressed closer. The puddle stayed still, and the eyes lingered. I rose shivering, feet wet, cold against the soft earth. The forest smelled of damp moss and rain-soaked soil. The reflection remained, watching, patient. I stepped away. The puddle shimmered faintly in my peripheral vision. The hum faded into silence, but the unease stayed, a weight in my chest, a memory in the fog. I walked on, alone, almost. The earth was damp beneath my knees. Fog wrapped around the roots and rocks, soft and cool. The smell of wet soil and moss pressed into my senses. I pressed my hands into the dirt. A faint vibration hummed beneath my palms. Low, persistent, almost alive. Roots twisted unnaturally under my fingers. They formed shapes, Symbols I didn't understand, curving, knotting, coiling into patterns that seemed deliberate. The hum grew louder. It pressed into my chest, my teeth, my skull. I tilted my head, listening. It was no longer just sound. It was voice. Soft, slow, stretching beneath the soil. Murmuring words I could almost feel, though I could not comprehend them. The fog shifted. Branches rustled faintly above. Leaves smelled of rain, damp and sharp. The soil quivered beneath my hands. I traced a symbol with my fingers. The roots pulsed, twisting tighter, responding. The hum echoed in my bones. A voice without form, patient, waiting. A shiver ran up my arms. Cold mist brushed my cheeks. I felt something. Watching from below, from the soil itself, the patterns in the roots shifted. Slow, deliberate. Letters? Shapes? I could not name them, only sense their intent. I pressed my palms harder into the dirt. The hum became clearer, insistent, a vibration of thought, not sound. It spoke to something deep within me, beneath reason, beneath fear. The fog swirled around my knees. Each inhale tasted of wet earth and iron. The soil moved, subtle but alive, pulling slightly against my hands. I tried to rise, but my fingers lingered, drawn to the twisting roots. The hum wrapped around me, creeping into my chest, filling my lungs with silent dread. I leaned closer. The fog pressed against my face, roots writhing beneath, symbols shifting, curling like living script. The voice beneath the soil spoke slowly. I could feel it in the hollow of my chest, a patient murmur, measured, deliberate, unending. I pulled my hands back. The roots stilled, but the hum lingered faintly, vibrating in the fog and air around me. I rose, knees wet and muddy. The forest smelled of rain, soil, and ancient green. The symbols stayed beneath the surface, silent, patient, waiting. I walked on. Feet pressed into soft, damp earth. The hum followed, faint, insistent, a reminder beneath the soil that I was not alone, almost. The forest felt thinner here. Mist curled low around the roots, damp and cold. The air smelled of wet pine and earth, faintly metallic. Tiny lights floated between the trees, soft, pale, weaving like fireflies. Each blink carried a strange warmth, almost like the pulse of something alive. I blinked. The lights vanished. Only the fog and wet earth remained, rustling softly beneath my feet. I stepped closer. The air pressed against my skin, cold and damp. The lights shimmered again, flickering between trunks and branches. I could see shapes inside them, elongated forms, too thin, too graceful to be human. They moved with the lights, weaving, curling, bending in impossible ways. I tried to focus. They disappeared again. The forest smelled of moss, rain, and old leaves. Soft footsteps pressed into wet earth, almost imperceptible. The lights returned, weaving slowly, carrying their shapes like shadows of another world. I stretched a hand toward one. The fog wrapped around my wrist, cold and damp. It shimmered, faded, then flickered somewhere else, always just beyond reach. The shapes inside twisted and stretched, slow, deliberate movements. The light shimmered over their elongated limbs, patient, watching. I breathed slowly. The air felt heavier, damp, filled with anticipation and quiet. The forest seemed to hold its breath, too. The lights flickered again, closer this time. The forms were more distinct. Limbs bending, bodies curving, almost floating. I could feel their presence in the fog, circling, patient, aware. A rustle brushed past my cheek. The fog swirled, wrapping around my ankles, pressing against my sleeves. The lights danced just out of reach, curious, teasing. I tried to follow them, feet soft against wet moss. Each step echoed faintly, swallowed by the fog. The elongated shapes shifted, as if guiding me through the forest. The lights pulsed softly, a gentle glow against the dark trees. Their warmth brushed my skin, tingling, unsettling, mesmerizing. I stopped, held my breath. The forms paused too, floating just beyond my gaze. The forest was silent except for the soft hum of their presence. I reached toward the nearest light once more. It flickered, vanished. A faint shimmer remained like memory. The shapes retreated into the branches, patient, distant, watching. I walked on, mist curling around my ankles, damp and cold. The lights lingered faintly between trees. Shadows of the impossible forms remained, whispering in the fog. Alone. Almost. The forest thinned, mist curling along the roots and fallen leaves. Air sharp with cold, damp, and the faint scent of rusted metal. Branches creaked softly above me, swaying without wind. Then I saw it, an iron door standing alone. No walls, no frame, no structure claiming it. Just dark metal, silent, waiting. I stepped closer. Fog wrapped around my ankles, damp and heavy. The door smelled of cold iron and rain, faintly metallic and sharp. My hand reached out. The surface was colder than I expected. Smooth, solid, unyielding. I pushed it slowly. A soft groan rolled through the hinges. Beyond, darkness stretched, dense, infinite. A breath brushed past me. Unseen, deliberate, I felt it against my neck. Soft, cold, like air exhaled from nowhere. I stepped back instinctively, heart thudding. The fog shifted. It clung to my sleeves, my hair, wrapping damp and cold around me. The forest seemed quieter, more patient, waiting as I lingered at the threshold. I stared into the void. No edges, no light, nothing familiar, only a sense of depth, pulling, patient, indifferent. The iron door pressed faintly against my hand, cold and solid, a reminder of reality outside the darkness. But the void behind it, it whispered against my chest, a quiet, endless pull. I stepped back again, breath catching, damp air filling my lungs. The forest smelled of wet pine, moss, and soil, yet the void held its own scent. Metallic, dry, ancient, I hesitated. Fingers brushing the cold iron, the unseen exhale came again. Longer this time, patient, deliberate. I could feel it watching me. No eyes, no shape, yet a presence that pressed against the fog in my chest. I closed the door slowly. The darkness receded. The exhale stopped. The forest seemed to release me, mist curling softly around my ankles again. I stepped back, heart still racing. The door remained, alone, silent. I walked away, feet pressing softly into wet earth, moss cold beneath them. The iron door faded slowly into the fog behind me. Regret settled in my chest. A weight, faint and lingering. I left, alone, almost. The forest was quiet, darker than usual. Mist curled along the roots and fallen leaves, damp and cold. The air smelled of wet earth, moss, and something faintly metallic. I heard them first. Murmurs, faint at first, curling around the trees. Soft, deliberate, almost like voices I should recognize. I stepped closer. Each word echoed off trunks and branches, slow and deliberate. I strained to understand, but the sentences twisted, slipping past comprehension. The fog pressed against my ankles, cold and damp. The murmurs followed my steps, shaping the air, slowly pressing against my chest. Weighty, insistent. I tried to step faster. The words slowed me. Drawn from the trees, curling around my mind, soft and patient. Leaves rustled above. No wind moved them. The murmurs rose slightly, threading through the branches, tangled with the fog, layered with the scent of wet moss and earth. I stopped. Breath shallow, chest tight. The words circled me, forming sounds I almost remembered, yet could not place. I stepped forward again. The fog wrapped my legs, damp and cold. The whispers followed, curling in the air, slow and measured, patient. Shadows stretched from the trunks. They shifted with the murmurs, dancing lightly across wet leaves. I felt observed, measured in silence between the words. Each step became deliberate, heavy. The forest smelled of rain, soil, and old pine, mixed with a faint metallic tang, the air thick with presence. I paused. The murmurs slowed with me, almost breathing, waiting for me to continue. My heartbeat matched the rhythm, soft, insistent, uneasy. I breathed in slowly. The fog pressed against my hair, my sleeves, wrapping, curling, binding in quiet. The words remained, patient, distant, unknowable. I walked on, feet soft on wet moss and dirt. The forest held me in the hum of soundless voices, murmurs that lingered long after the steps ended. Alone. almost. The forest floor was soft and damp beneath my feet. Mist curled along the roots and rocks, cold and wet. The air smelled of wet leaves and earth, sharp and metallic. Then I saw it, a shadow hovering just above the ground, silent, patient. It moved with me. Every step I took it mirrored. Deliberate, precise, impossibly synced. I froze. The fog pressed against my ankles and sleeves, damp and cold. The shadow tilted its head, slow, questioning. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. Breath caught in my chest, damp and shallow. Leaves rustled softly above. The fog wrapped around my hair and neck. The shadow followed each movement, tilting, stretching, bending impossibly, yet always exact, always aware. I stepped backward. The shadow shifted with me, floating smoothly, silently, patient. Its form blurred slightly in the mist, dark against the pale light of the fog. A shiver ran up my arms. The forest smelled of moss, rain, and wet soil. The shadow mirrored my hesitation, watching, questioning, knowing. I tried to step sideways. It matched me. I wanted to look away, but the fog seemed to press my eyes open. The shadow's presence pressed against my chest, heavy, silent, insistent. I could feel the forest holding its breath, too, waiting for something I could not name. I crouched slightly. The shadow crouched with me. A soft hum rose in my chest, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat, damp, cold, unsettling. I reached a hand toward it. The mist swirled around my fingers. The shadow tilted its head further. Curious, patient, unblinking. I stepped back again. The fog clung to my legs, damp and cold. The shadow hovered exact, a dark echo of my every movement. I wanted to run, but my legs pressed into the soft earth, frozen. The shadow tilted, observing, its form hovering just above the wet moss, a presence that should not exist. I whispered, though the words went nowhere. No echo, only the wet air and the mist curling around me. The shadow remained, patient, mirroring me in silence. I moved forward slowly. It followed. Every step, every breath, every shiver, every pause. Finally, I stopped. The shadow tilted its head. The fog swirled around us. The forest exhaled softly, damp and still. I turned and walked away, feet pressing softly into the moss, wet and cold. The shadow lingered behind me, hovering, waiting, patient, alone, almost. The fog lay thick across the forest floor, cold and damp, curling around my ankles, soaking my shoes. The air smelled of wet pine, earth, and something faintly metallic. I saw them first. Pairs of eyes, pale, reflecting faint starlight, blinking slowly, deliberately. They hovered in the mist, sometimes hidden, sometimes multiplying with every step I took. Their gaze pressed against my skin, a tingling, crawling warmth that felt both alive and patient. I slowed my pace. The fog seemed heavier here, wrapping my legs, my sleeves, every breath drawn damp and cold, tasting faintly of rain and soil. The eyes followed, mirroring my movement without sound. Every blink, every pause, every shift, synchronized with my own heartbeat. I tried to look away. They multiplied. Pairs of pale starlight flickered through the mist, some closer, some farther, yet all locked on me. Leaves rustled above. No wind moved them. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I stepped carefully, feet pressing softly into wet moss. Each step echoed faintly, swallowed by the fog. Yet the eyes remained patient, unblinking. I felt alone. Alone, yet not alone. The eyes carried intelligence, patience, measuring me in silence, tracing my path through the mist. A shiver ran down my spine. The fog pressed closer, damp and heavy. The forest smelled of pine, moss, and old soil, yet the eyes seemed to carry their own scent. Metallic, cold, patient. I stopped. Held my breath. The eyes blinked slowly, some disappearing, some multiplying. They seemed to dance at the edges of my vision, flickering in and out like pale firelight. I moved again. The tingling on my skin intensified. The fog wrapped around me, clinging to my hair, my neck, my shoulders. The eyes followed, slow, deliberate, endless. I turned slowly, trying to see how far they stretched. Pears everywhere, floating in the mist between trunks, hovering above roots, blinking, watching, calculating. The forest was silent except for my own shallow breath. No footsteps, no rustling of animals, just the quiet observation of pale eyes. I slowed to a crawl. Hands brushing the wet leaves, the moss, the soft soil. The fog coiled around me, damp and cold. The eyes shifted with my movements, some disappearing, some multiplying, always observing, always patient. I stopped again. The tingling became a hum in my veins. The pale eyes flickered, like reflections of distant stars in the fog. They held me in place, silent, unblinking, patient. I breathed slowly. The fog pressed in, wet and cold. The eyes blinked in patterns I could not understand, sometimes vanishing, sometimes doubling, but never leaving me alone. I walked again, feet pressed softly into the wet earth, moss clinging to my shoes. The forest smelled of rain, earth, and pine. The eyes multiplied, sometimes fading, sometimes reflecting faint starlight in numbers I could not count. I felt the weight of the forest, fog curling, cold, damp, eyes watching, unblinking, calculating. Every step slowed. Every breath felt measured. I wanted to run, but my body moved in rhythm with the fog, with the eyes, with the patient, quiet dread that pressed against my skin. Finally, I paused. The fog swirled around me, damp and dense. The pale eyes blinked slowly, hovering, waiting, patient, endless. I exhaled softly, alone, almost, but not quite. The forest held me. The fog pressed. The eyes lingered, watching. The forest shifted around me. Mist clung to every root and branch, cold and wet against my skin. The air smelled of damp earth, moss, and the faint tang of decay. I turned. The trail I had walked disappeared. Soft moss and tangled roots replaced familiar earth. Every tree seemed wrong. Every rock, every shadow, unfamiliar. I stepped forward cautiously. The fog pressed against my legs, damp and heavy. A rustle in the leaves above made me freeze. But the sound wasn't moving closer. It was everywhere at once, wrapping around me in silence. I tried to retrace my steps. But each landmark was wrong. The fallen log I remembered, gone. The twisted oak, nowhere in sight. Panic fluttered in my chest. But the fog swallowed it, pressing cold and damp against my sleeves and ankles. The forest seemed to watch, patient, unblinking. I walked in a circle. I could feel it before I saw it. The same weight behind me, measuring each step, following, waiting. The air smelled of wet pine and moss, mixed with that faint metallic tang again. Every inhale felt thick, heavy. Every step felt like sinking into the damp earth. I tried to call out. My voice vanished in the fog. Only the soft rustle of leaves answered. Or maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it was the forest itself. I stopped. The fog pressed closer, curling around my hair and shoulders. The shadows of trees twisted strangely, forms bending in ways they shouldn't. And then I noticed. The path beneath me had vanished entirely. I turned slowly, every sense alert. The forest had become a maze. Every landmark was wrong. Every direction felt wrong. Soft footsteps, my own, or not. I felt them brush against the edge of my awareness. A presence, patient and silent, watching me wander in endless loops. I crouched, hands brushing moss and soil. The fog pressed damp and cold against my skin. I could smell wet pine, decaying leaves, and something else. Metallic, subtle, alive. I moved again slowly, deliberately. Every step echoed softly, swallowed immediately by fog. The forest seemed endless, twisting, folding, replacing what I thought I knew. I stopped, breath shallow, heart tight. The trail behind me was gone. I could no longer trust any step, any turn. The forest had claimed me, wrapped me in its patient, silent observation. I took another step. The fog shifted. The shadows twisted. And I realized I had been walking in circles, alone, but not unseen. The forest followed, patient, silent, endless. The fog hung low, heavy and damp. It pressed against my face, curling into my hair. The forest smelled of wet pine, moss, and cold earth. A sudden gust swept through the trees. Warm, heavy, not my own breath. Leaves twirled unnaturally, spinning, curling, clinging to my shoulders. The air vibrated softly, as though carrying a presence just above me. I looked up. Branches swayed, but no wind moved them. Shadows shifted in the fog, twisting along the trunks. A soft clicking echoed from above, slow, deliberate, like wings brushing the mist. I held my breath. The forest felt alive, observing with quiet patience. The clicking paused, then started again, measured and distant. The fog pressed closer, damp and cold. My skin tingled where the leaves brushed against me. The heavy warmth hovered in the air, wrapping around my shoulders, my neck, my chest. I took a step forward. The clicking echoed again, not from a single point, but surrounding me, hovering above and beyond the trees. The air smelled faintly metallic, mixed with wet pine and soil. It made my stomach churn. I shivered, cold running under the weight of that unseen breath. Leaves rustled, curled around my boots, my hands, following my movements as if the forest itself were alive. I froze. The fog thickened. The clicking grew more distant, then closer, always above, just out of reach. A branch bent unnaturally, droplets of water shaking loose, landing on my hands. I flinched. The warmth hovered, patient, waiting. The forest was silent except for the faint, soft clicks. The fog pressed in tight, soft footsteps swallowed by wet moss, yet I felt observed from every direction. I took another step. Leaves brushed against my sleeves. The heavy breath shifted with me. I could almost feel its intent, patient, quiet, unyielding. I stopped, listening. The clicking paused. Only the forest hummed with quiet anticipation. The warmth lingered, heavy and subtle, wrapping around my chest. I swallowed. The fog swirled around my boots. The trees stretched taller than I remembered. The forest seemed endless, a maze of shadows and mist. The clicking started again, soft, measured above the fog. My pulse raced quietly in my ears. The breath brushed past my cheek, warm and deliberate, as if the forest itself exhaled around me. I took another careful step. The fog followed, clinging to my arms, my hair. Leaves whispered along the ground, curving, spinning, alive. I paused once more. The clicking faded slightly. The heavy breath remained. Patient, waiting, hovering above, unseen. I exhaled slowly, fog curling from my lips, mingling with that warm, heavy presence. The forest pressed close, damp and silent, and I realized I was not alone. Not unseen. The clicking echoed one last time, then disappeared into the dense fog above. Only the soft rustle of leaves remained. The warmth lingered a moment longer, then faded. I stood trembling slightly, alone but marked by what had hovered above. The forest held its silence. I moved forward slowly, every step measured, careful, knowing something patient still lingered overhead, waiting, always watching. The night was unnaturally still. The fog lingered low along the ground, cold and damp against my skin. Every breath tasted of wet pine and frost. I lifted my gaze. The stars above were sharper than usual, pale points of light glimmering through the mist. Then, subtly, they began to shift. Not in ways my eyes could follow, but shapes formed in my mind. Symbols I felt more than saw. A language older than thought, alien and patient. A streak of light darted across the sky. Too fast, precise, deliberate, it left a trail that shimmered faintly, like melted silver sliding along the darkness. The forest around me rustled quietly. Leaves whispered over wet branches, branches scraping together, yet the air remained motionless. The streak above moved with intent, as if observing me, curious. I stepped forward. The ground was soft beneath my boots, damp earth clinging to my soles. I reached out instinctively, wanting to touch something real, but the air held only cold mist. The shapes above twisted again, shimmering patterns that pressed on my thoughts. I felt their intelligence, their subtle probing. The stars blinked in sequences, tiny pulses against the black canvas, like eyes blinking in rhythm with my heartbeat. A soft hum drifted through the fog, barely audible, vibrating in my chest. It was not wind. It was presence. Curious, silent, patient. I tried to speak. No words came. The forest waited with me. Every leaf, every droplet of condensation, stilled as if the world held its breath. The streak of light returned, hovering briefly, then vanishing behind a thin veil of fog. I felt it watch me, intelligent and unblinking. The shapes above reformed, not static, but flowing, like liquid symbols, alien and impossibly precise. I shivered. The night air pressed against my neck, cold and wet, clinging to hair and skin. Something inside me stirred, a recognition I could not name. A whisper of movement brushed past my shoulder. Not wind, not a branch. I spun, but saw only fog and shadow. The shapes above pulsed faintly, a rhythm I could almost touch with my mind. The hum deepened slightly, vibrating through my chest, through my ribs, through the soles of my feet. I felt anchored and unanchored at once, tethered to the earth and pulled toward the stars. I stayed still, listening. The forest held silence like a secret, and the streak of light hovered again, above, between branches, casting a faint reflection in the wet moss. My pulse slowed. My breath became soft mist. The shapes lingered, symbols and patterns, not threatening but insistent, probing the edges of thought. I reached my hand upward, not to grasp, but to acknowledge. The air shifted, warmth brushing my fingertips, and then nothing. Only fog, only rustling leaves, only the faint, patient hum that settled in my chest. The forest seemed older somehow, alive with unspoken curiosity, watching alongside the stars. I turned back to the path, footsteps muffled by moss and fog. The shapes remained in my mind's eye, glimmering, alien, and I knew they would not leave me. Not entirely. Always there, hovering just beyond the reach of sight, curious, patient, unfathomable. The forest floor was cold and damp. Fallen leaves pressed against my palms. The roots of the old trees twisted around me, like fingers reaching from the earth. I crouched, drawing my knees close, breath curling in the fog. A faint rustling whispered beneath me, soft, patient, deliberate. The roots seemed alive, not moving visibly, but vibrating in subtle patterns that pressed against my fingertips. A pulse, slow at first, then steady, synchronized with my heartbeat. Whispers rose from the soil. Barely audible, they slithered into my thoughts, stretching moments into hours. Time felt fragile, elastic, bending in ways I could not name. I leaned closer, the smell of wet earth filling my nose, damp moss clinging to my clothing. The whispers spoke of observation, of someone, or something, watching from above, patient, quiet, unmoving. The fog drifted lower, swallowing the bases of the trees. Shadows pooled around me, deepening the gaps between roots, hiding shapes that flickered when I blinked. I felt a presence beneath the soil, pressure against my palms, a subtle heartbeat echoing in the dirt. A soft hum rose like a resonance of stone and root. It was not mechanical. It was alive, pulsing, stretching into the spaces between leaves. I closed my eyes and the whispers grew louder, folding around my thoughts, filling my chest with unease. Each root seemed to pulse individually, a slow rhythm, insistent, patient. I traced them with trembling fingers, feeling patterns too deliberate to be random. Symbols formed under my touch, ancient and unknowable, etched into bark and soil alike. The forest held its breath. No wind moved the leaves, no animal stirred. Only the faint whispering, a chorus of echoes from beneath the ground. It spoke of distance, of moments observed, of patience beyond my understanding. I pressed my ear to the earth. The pulse grew stronger, resonating through my skull. I could feel its weight in my chest, the slow rhythm matching mine, as if the forest itself was aware of me. A faint vibration ran up my spine, like tiny footsteps in the soil or the gentle shifting of unseen roots. I dared not move, dared not break the fragile connection. Every breath hung heavy, laden with the smell of wet bark, of soil turned and pressed by unseen hands. the whispers changed. Not words exactly, but fragments of thoughts, slowed and stretched across time. They seemed to know me, to remember shapes I had never seen, paths I had never walked. The earth beneath me throbbed, alive with something patient and knowing. I tried to rise. My limbs felt rooted, heavy with the pull of unseen fingers. The fog pressed closer, a soft, damp weight that whispered in rhythm with the roots. The forest floor hummed beneath me, vibrating through boots, bones, and breath. I stayed crouched, listening. The whispers undulated, folding into themselves, echoing across time and space. I felt watched, from above, from beneath, everywhere at once, patient, quiet, unblinking, and then slowly, the pulse faded, leaving only the faint scent of earth and moss. The whispers lingered in memory, stretching moments into endless echoes. I stood, trembling, the forest silent again, the roots still, yet aware. I stepped back, softly, leaving impressions in the wet soil. The fog swallowed the traces, and the forest held its secret, patient, eternal, beneath my feet. The clearing was quiet. The fog hovered low, hugging the edges of the trees. Damp leaves pressed against my boots, and the air smelled faintly of moss and cold earth. There, in the pale light, a figure stood perfectly still. It did not sway with the breeze, did not blink or breathe in any way I could perceive. I stepped closer. The ground felt soft underfoot, yet heavy, almost deliberate, as if the forest itself slowed me down. The figure's outline was faint, blurred at the edges like smoke, yet it seemed to hold weight in the air. I could feel it, a presence that pressed gently against my chest, a quiet awareness that filled the space between us. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and the figure vanished. No rustle, no crackle of movement. Only a space left behind that felt full of eyes, of knowing, of something regretful and patient. The fog shifted. The clearing seemed wider now, as if it had expanded in the figure's absence. Shadows pooled among the trees, yet none dared touch the center where it had stood. A soft hum lingered in my ears, vibrating through my bones. I tried to trace where it had been. The ground held no imprint. No disturbance of leaves, no marks on the soil. Just silence, and the faint echo of awareness that lingered like a breath. I took another step forward. The air pressed against my face differently, cooler, heavier, carrying the faint scent of smoke or iron, though I could see no source. The emptiness held attention, and I could not shake the feeling that it watched me still, without moving, without breathing. The forest around me whispered. Branches rubbed together, leaves rustled softly. I realized I was holding my own breath, trying not to disturb the fragile pause. Every footstep seemed to echo, though the earth remained silent. I circled the spot. The clearing remained empty. Yet the awareness persisted, a subtle weight pressing from the place where it had vanished. It was patient, resigned, as though it had expected me, and my approach had meant nothing. The fog drifted closer, fingers curling through the grass and around my ankles. I shivered, not from cold, but from the quiet regret that hung in the space. The figure had been here and even gone. It had left a piece of itself behind, a trace in the atmosphere, a reminder of the space between presence and absence. I knelt briefly, touching the wet earth where it had stood. Nothing responded. Only the smell of damp soil, the taste of mist on my tongue, and the soft hum in my chest that matched the pulse of the forest. The light shifted, pale and uncertain. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision. I blinked, and the clearing seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. The figure had vanished completely, yet the echo of its awareness lingered. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate, as if the forest itself might pull me back. The clearing was empty, the fog curling in quiet spirals. And still I felt the weight of it, the still figure and the patient, lingering gaze that would follow me even as I walked away. I left the clearing, each step soft against the damp earth, the shadows brushing lightly against my legs. The mist swallowed the open space behind me, and the faint echo of awareness was the only proof it had ever existed. The fog curled low. It hung thick between the trunks, clinging to branches and to the ground. The air smelled of wet earth and cold moss. I moved slowly, feet pressing into damp leaves. Every step felt watched, though the forest appeared empty. A soft rustling drifted through the mist. It was quick, faint, like fingers brushing against fabric. I turned, but nothing was there. Only the fog shifting, alive. Shapes flickered beyond the veil, faster than my eyes could follow. Elongated, thin, impossible to hold. The mist swallowed them almost as soon as I glimpsed them. I froze. The hairs on my arms tingled. A presence lingered, patient, without form, watching from somewhere just out of reach. The mist moved again, swirling around the trunks, slithering along the forest floor. It pressed against my face, wet and cool, carrying whispers I could not understand. I stepped forward cautiously. Each footfall made the rustling echo, but it did not come from the ground. It was everywhere and nowhere. I could feel it brushing against the back of my neck, against my arms, yet it remained unseen. I tried to peer through the fog. The shapes vanished as soon as I focused. Pale light shimmered off the droplets clinging to branches. For a moment I thought I saw eyes. Just a flicker. Gone before I could confirm. The rustling grew louder, irregular, anxious, like breath moving just above the leaves. I could feel the pulse of it in my chest, matching the rhythm of my own heartbeat. It watched patiently, intelligent, and yet formless. I turned in a slow circle. The forest seemed to shift with me. Branches extended farther, shadows stretched thinner. The mist filled every hollow, curling around my ankles, wrapping me in silence that hummed. I crouched briefly, hands brushing wet moss. It vibrated slightly under my touch, like the earth itself was breathing. A shape darted through the fog, too fast to follow, and my chest tightened. The forest was alive in ways I could not name. The rustling continued behind the mist, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always observing, never approaching. I tried to step back, but the ground felt different. The mist thickened, shapes swirled at the edges of my vision. A sensation pressed against my skin, a brush of awareness without form, and I realized I was not alone. I listened. Leaves whispered to one another. Branches creaked softly. The rustling pulsed in the air around me, and I could feel it in my bones. It was patient. It was waiting. The shapes darted again. The fog trembled slightly. A faint hum vibrated through the clearing, like something underground, like roots sighing beneath the soil. I held my breath, but the forest kept moving, always just beyond comprehension. I took one final step forward. The mist curled around my legs, shadows clinging, and the rustling faded into silence. Only the lingering awareness remained, watching, patient, formless, as if it had always been part of the air itself. The clearing opened, though I could not see past the haze. I felt the shapes fold back into the fog, the presence retreating but never gone. The forest was quiet now, yet I knew it was still there, behind the mist, always watching. The forest was quiet, yet it felt alive. Mist hovered low, clinging to every branch and leaf. The air was thick with moisture, and the scent of damp earth pressed against my nose. A hollow sound echoed through the trees. Deep, resonant, vibrating the air. It rolled slowly, as if the forest itself exhaled. My footsteps seemed louder here, amplified by the mist, and somehow by the sound itself. Each step pressed against the soft ground. Leaves crunched faintly, twigs snapped under weight. The echo followed me, shifting with every movement. It was not distant. It was inside the air, inside my chest, inside the rhythm of my breath. I paused. The hollow hum lingered. It carried a vibration that tickled my fingertips. Branches above swayed slightly, though no wind moved them. The forest seemed to lean in, breathing in unison with the echo. Shadows stretched across the trunks. They moved almost imperceptibly, distorting as if reacting to the sound. A faint metallic scent mixed with the soil. It lingered, sharp and cold, like something waiting underground. I tried to step forward. The hollow sound followed, stretching longer, folding into itself. Each footfall pushed it outward, then it recoiled, wrapping around me like a living thing. The mist shifted, revealing glimpses of the forest floor. Small shapes darted behind tree roots, vanishing the moment I looked directly. A low hum rose from the air, vibrating my teeth, and I felt the pulse in my skull. The sound was not just heard, it was felt. Deep in my bones, inside my chest, inside the back of my mind, I realized my breathing matched it. Slow, uneven, uncertain. A pale light glimmered through the fog. It illuminated the trunks in a sickly, muted glow. The shadows swayed, and the hollow sound seemed to sigh. I moved again, and the vibration followed, curling around my legs, pressing against my skin, an invisible weight I could not shake. I stopped once more. The echo lingered, rolling softly through the branches, tugging at my hair, pressing against my shoulders. The forest seemed to breathe in response, and I could feel it, alive, patient, observing, like the mist and the hollow sound were one. I took a cautious step forward. The vibration shifted with me. The echoes layered, folding over themselves like whispers trying to form words. Yet nothing coherent came, only awareness, waiting behind the fog, between the trunks and the rhythm of my heartbeat. A faint rustling moved in time with the hollow sound. It circled me, never seen, never caught. I felt it brush against the back of my neck, against my forearms, as though reminding me that the forest was aware of every movement. I breathed slowly, trying to match the rhythm of the echoes. The air smelled of wet moss and cold iron, and I realized the sound was not just in the forest. It was part of me now, inside my chest, inside my pulse. It would not leave. I stepped forward again. The hollow sound lingered, rolling and fading at once like water receding from stone. Branches swayed in time, mist clung to the air, and the forest exhaled once more. A quiet weight pressed into my shoulders, and I knew it had always been listening, and it always would be. The fog closed in around me. Shadows deepened, but the hollow echo receded slowly, leaving only a faint vibration that hummed at the edge of my awareness. I moved on, but the memory of the sound stayed, pressing against my skin, inside my chest, inside my breath. The night pressed close, fog curling around the roots and trunks. The ground was soft, damp, giving slightly beneath each careful step. Shadows flickered in the corner of my vision. Each blink brought a new shape, slender, twisted, impossible. They disappeared when I turned fully. I felt them linger anyway, watching from just beyond the edges of sight. A hum rose through the forest, low, insistent, vibrating the mist. It pressed against my eardrums and seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. The air smelled faintly of wet pine and something acrid, like iron left to rust in rain. I paused, holding my breath. The shapes pulsed and flickered again, just out of focus, like heat on asphalt. A breeze swirled through the trees, brushing against my neck, and carrying with it the soft, restless rustle of movement. Every step forward made the shadows shift. A tree trunk appeared, elongated, its bark twisted into lines that shouldn't exist. I felt the rough texture beneath my fingertips, but my eyes kept catching motion where none should be. A presence followed, patient, unseen, a weight pressing through the fog. I shivered, the hum growing louder, almost sentient. It wrapped around me, a living vibration that I couldn't escape. Branches creaked overhead, soft echoes bouncing through the hollow spaces of the forest. I tried to steady myself. The shapes blinked at the corners again. One seemed to stretch toward me, thin as smoke but impossibly solid. I stepped back, the ground cold and damp beneath my feet, the fog curling into my ankles. Each blink of the eye brought a new flicker. A silhouette paused just long enough to feel aware of me, then vanished before I could look directly. The hum of the night rose again, shifting from low vibration to a gentle, insistent thrum. It was patient. It was waiting. The mist thickened, softening the outlines of the forest. Shadows no longer moved with the wind, but against it. As though aware of every motion I made, I felt the air thicken, heavier against my chest, as if the forest itself was breathing slowly around me. A fleeting scent of something decayed brushed my nose. It lingered just long enough to unsettle, then vanished. The shapes flickered faster now, stretching between trees, across roots, never still, never seen clearly. I could feel their gaze pressing against the back of my skull, through my shoulders, inside my bones. I wanted to turn to leave, but my feet refused. The hum tightened around me, a rhythm that matched my own pulse. I could feel it in the soles of my feet, vibrating up through the fog, through the air, through the very ground. The flickers slowed slightly, as though considering me. Shapes elongated, shortened, twisting like smoke caught in a current. I realized then they were not random. They were aware, curious. I breathed slowly, trying to match the hum, to become part of its rhythm. The mist curled around my wrists, soft and damp. The forest quiet except for the insistent vibration. The shapes blinked once more, then dissolved into nothing, leaving only the soft, lingering awareness of being watched. I stepped forward, and the night returned to silence, though the hum remained faint in my chest, a pulse just beyond perception. Shadows lingered in the periphery, not quite gone, not quite still, waiting. The clearing opened before me, soft fog curling around my ankles, thick and cool against my skin. The trees loomed beyond, their silhouettes dark and still. No wind stirred their branches. No animals called. Only silence pressed close, a quiet that seemed heavier than air. Above, the sky pulsed faintly, not with stars, but with movement I felt more than saw. Shapes shimmered in the distance, subtle, impossible, alive in ways the eye could not follow. I sank to the damp ground, fog seeping into my clothes, into the nape of my neck. Soft and whispering, I realized then I was not alone. Nothing stood near me. No figure, no shadow, yet a presence lingered, patient, eternal. It brushed against my awareness, like breath through leaves, like a heartbeat under the soil. I traced my fingers through the mist, cool, damp, resisting, and it felt alive. The fog moved around me in patterns, curving and folding like something breathing slowly, studying me from all sides. A distant hum rose, low and constant, almost imperceptible at first, then threading through the forest and into my chest. It was neither threatening nor comforting, simply there, patient, eternal. I lifted my gaze to the sky again. Shapes flickered, elongated forms drifting between stars, curves, and lines I did not recognize, a geometry older than memory. A faint warmth brushed my cheeks, though the air was cold. I inhaled slowly. The fog pressed against my lungs, damp, earthy, fragrant with pine and something acrid, something unnameable. I could hear the faintest rustle beneath the roots, beneath the fog, as if the earth itself were listening. My own heartbeat grew slower, sinking, reluctantly, to the pulse above. The presence lingered, patient and unyielding, not pressing, not leaving, simply observing. I let my hands rest in the damp earth, feeling the hum vibrate through my fingertips. The clearing seemed smaller, yet infinite at once, like the fog and the sky had merged into one, and I sat in the middle of it. Shadows twisted in the corner of my vision, curving between trees, not threatening, but undeniably aware of me. Every movement was mirrored by the subtle, patient pulsing above. I closed my eyes briefly. When I opened them, the clearing had not changed, yet nothing felt the same. I exhaled, slowly, deliberately. The weight of isolation pressed, but not sharply, softly, like a blanket of fog, like the gentle hum that wrapped around me, like a presence neither hostile nor friendly, just constant. I could feel it everywhere, in the rustle of unseen leaves, in the vibration beneath my feet, in the curl of fog around my knees. A quiet acceptance settled in my chest, warm, faint, almost fragile. I breathed again, letting the fog seep between my fingers, letting the shapes drift across the sky, letting the forest hold me in its stillness. I was alone, yet not. Alone, yet part of the watching, the pulsing, the eternal quiet. The clearing breathed with me, or I with it. I could not tell. The fog shifted softly, curling and folding around shadows that flickered just beyond perception. The pulse above and the hum below meshed into one continuous rhythm, slow, constant, infinite. I did not move. I did not speak. I simply sat, letting the presence linger, patient, eternal, alive in the fog and sky, alive beneath and above.